G'day mate, 40 here. So I've got a stunning scoop for you. You might need to be sitting down to be able to fully absorb this, but according to informed sources who are close to the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump has a transactional approach to relationships. And I know you are shocked because this is perhaps the first time that you have ever heard of anybody taking a transactional approach to relationships. Because pretty much everybody else I know, and everybody else I've even heard of, everybody else I've seen portrayed in movies and TV shows and novels and literary nonfiction and non-literary nonfiction, and on social media, pretty much everybody else I know or have even heard of has an approach to relationships based on radical love and inclusion. So, my God, can you believe that our President of the United States has this blinkered transactional approach to relationships? That's unbelievable. I don't know anybody else like that. Right? Everybody I have ever met embodies unconditional love. Right? Everybody else I've ever met has a values approach to relationships. Everybody I've ever met has this transcendent one love, one universal morality approach to relationships. Oh, wait, that's not right. Everybody has a transactional approach to relationships. Some people hide it better than others. Some people use beautiful language to describe their relationships as anything but transactional. But effectively, everyone has a transactional approach to relationships, except perhaps for saints. And so, this blinding insight just occurred to me. Donald Trump may have the most realistic approach to human nature of any president of the United States in memory. So he doesn't tend to invoke, except in the most obligatory of terms, our shared values and all that other highfalutin stuff about being a shining city on the hill. Right? Ronald Reagan would invoke that shining city on the hill rhetoric. But Donald Trump, I think, is the most realistic appraiser of the human condition, which is why when you saw the Ali G clip where Ali G is trying to trick him into some kind of entrepreneurial venture, like Donald Trump catches on right away. And so I suspect that entrepreneurs who employ people tend to have a fairly realistic view of human nature. And so if you're a boss and you have employees, all right, you probably pretty quickly understand that employees will generally try to get away with as much as possible, will try to do as little work as possible while extracting from you as much payment as possible. And so the news media keeps telling us that Donald Trump has this transactional approach to relationships, but isn't that how the world works? Right? Don't almost everybody have a transactional approach to relationships, with rare exceptions? Right? Parents often have far more love for their children and are far more willing to sacrifice for their kids than pretty much anyone else. And so maybe we should be bloody grateful that Donald Trump has a transactional approach to relationships, because the world works on a transactional approach to relationships. Right? When you leave home, you leave the warm bosom of your family. Okay? You're going to emerge into a world overwhelmingly consisting of transactional relationships. So we should thank God that Donald Trump has a very transactional approach to relationships. Donald Trump is simultaneously the biggest liar and the biggest truth teller we've ever had as a president of the United States. Right? His transactional approach to relationships with other countries is so incredibly realistic. And he just doesn't bother to camouflage it and to disguise it using highfalutin language of radical love and inclusion and our shared values. Right? What unites people primarily are not shared values. Right? What helps a family to get along and to love each other and sacrifice for each other is not their shared values. Right? It's not their shared theology, their shared politics, their shared transcendent moral code. It is, they feel like the other members of the family are essentially an extension of themselves, that there is a bond, there's a genetic bond with each other. Right? There are shared experiences that you build upon, that you feel comfortable with each other. And you can usually start up relations with your family, even if you haven't seen each other for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Hello, YouTube land. So I'm a big fan of a realistic approach, right? Recognizing that it's a good thing to demystify how people work, right? The best relations are between people who understand that they have shared interests. So I guess I'm perhaps very Asian in this. I think shared interests are so much more important than shared values. Right. What unites Americans is not primarily the Constitution. Right. I keep seeing references in the news media to the democratic way of life. Right? Name me a country that overwhelmingly has a democratic way of life. I submit to you that virtually no country has a democratic way of life. If you're in an advanced economy with a democratic political system, yeah, you get to vote every 2 or 4 years. And if you go to a 12-step program, there's probably considerable democracy in that. And in some churches, some clubs, some synagogues, there is often a component of a democratic ethos. But overwhelmingly, our lives, even in this citadel of democracy, this shining city on a hill, the United States of America, does not have a democratic way of life. Right? You get up in the morning, and if you're a child, all right, your decisions are made for you by the adults. There's no democracy usually in a family. There may be at times democratic components. Let's say everyone's an adult and you're trying to decide on what movie to watch together, right? But overwhelmingly, family life does not operate on a democracy. You go to work. It's highly unlikely that your workplace is a democratic way of life. I mean, tell me I'm wrong, mate. Tell me, describe for me, paint me a vivid picture, transport me to the details of your exciting democratic way of life. Is there anything more erotically exciting than meeting someone and sharing a democratic way of life? Whew, that might really give you the horn. Just imagine you make a singles ad looking for an opposite sex partner who would like to share my democratic way of life. So the creator of the TV show Mad Men said that that which is sexism in the boardroom is erotic fuel in the bedroom. Right? Actually, nobody has a democratic way of life. This is just highfalutin language about a reality that does not exist. And so it's not common values that's going to unite nations, right? It's common interests. And the other nations with whom you share common interests will change over time as situations change. So from 1941 to 1945, the United States had common interests in helping Soviet Union defeat Germany. But as soon as Soviet Union had defeated Germany, right, we then had an interest to be stronger and more powerful and not to be bullied and pushed around by the Soviet Union. So we were helping them for years, and then it's like, getting out of here, mate. Okay, let's go to the chat. shared values and goals are probably the single most critical factor in the overwhelming success of arranged marriages in Orthodox Judaism. Our shared values and goals, I would submit to you that it is shared bonds, right? Shared relations, meaning family, friends, community, people that you went to yeshiva with, people that you've davened with, right? It's those shared human ties, and it's those shared rituals and practices that are overwhelmingly the glue that most people, even highly intelligent Ashkenazi Jews, don't really have much clarity on values, right? Most people lead lives dominated by their concerns about family, work, education, extended family, community. And so it's shared community, shared rituals, shared bonds, right? Shared connections, right? Shared ways of doing things. But of all those things, I would wager to you that the most important thing keeping people together are their shared connections to each other, to their children, to their parents, to their family, to their extended family, to their community, to their friends, to their way of life. Right? It's those connections. So I would submit to you that even if a couple has shared values, whatever that means, and shared goals, if they are not bound together primarily by close ties, bonds, right? Bonds to each other where they like each other, bonds where they like other people, and so they go to each other's homes for meals, that they work with each other, that they pray with each other, that they study Torah together, that they engage in recreational and educational and fun activities together, right? Without those shared bonds, all right, the values, the shared values aren't going to matter much. Now, shared goals, yeah, but the shared goals should primarily be in interpersonal terms. That you want your children to receive a traditional Jewish education, and that you want them to be a part of the Jewish community, the traditional Jewish community, that you want to be able to go to shul with 2, 3, 4 generations of your family. You want to get together for simchas, for weddings, get together, God forbid, on sad occasions, but you're all joining together and you get along, you appreciate each other. There is less loathing and more liking between you and the people that you have in common. So generally, human relations don't work unless you have at least 3 positive interactions for every negative interaction. So a husband and wife in Orthodox Judaism can share goals and share values, I would submit. But if their interactions with each other are fewer than 3 positive to 1 negative, I would submit to you that they are on very shaky ground. And if your interactions with your friends fall below a ratio of at least 3 positive interactions for every negative interaction, all right, that friendship's not going to last. If you don't have several friends with whom you have like at least probably an 8-to-1 ratio of positive interactions for every negative interaction, all right, at your shul, you're not going to last long at that particular shul. If most of your friends are not in the community, not in the Jewish community, right, you're not going to last long in the Jewish community. Right? You are overwhelmingly likely to reproduce the choices of your closest friends. Democracy is the values of who we are. It includes respect for minorities as well as promoting women. Beautiful. Art Bell in the chat. Some landscaping needed back there. Sidewalk fixing needed. 77% of the U.S. population would fail the military physical. Okay, so yeah, it is nice that there aren't a lot of fatties in Donald Trump's cabinet, and that the SecDef, Secretary of Defense, he's not a fat, sickly guy like Lloyd Austin, the SecDef under Joe Biden. Right? He's young, vigorous. He can go running in below zero temperature, and it feels good, man. Like it's depressing to look at people on TV who are running your nation, running your community, and they're old, sick, frail, fat. There's an episode of that TV show Fargo where a guy with a fat wife is told you can't trust a fat woman because she can't control her desires. And then there's a 6-minute comedy video that's just dropped on YouTube. It's for men who have fat wives, and they all get together like a 12-step program and like support each other and commiserate about what it's like to have a wife who weighs over 200 pounds and how they didn't start out that way. God forbid. God forbid. So here we are. Wait for the gimbal grumble. Multi-streams tax the brain. Watching that on 8 windows. Pot awful claims. Okay. So one of my favorite writers is a bloke on the left, Simon Kuper, I believe it is, Kuper. He's a columnist for the Financial Times. He wrote a great book on the Oxbridge elite who run Great Britain. So the graduates of Oxford and Cambridge University usually study PPE, politics, philosophy, and economics. And so he released that book a few years ago. He's written a couple of books on, he's written several books on soccer, Simon Kuper, and he's got a terrific column out today about how Donald Trump is the first pessimistic president. And I mean, that's just hilarious. And I am on the one hand like Susie Sunshine, Mr. Love, light, and optimism. On the other hand, I'm incredibly cynical and skeptical and sober in my estimation of other people and the role of self-interest and the role of evolutionary incentives. So I think because I'm pretty hard-headed and realistic, I can then layer onto that foundation a choice to focus on the positive. But if you just look at the raw material of life, it's I'm sure it's very easy to be pessimistic. I choose not to because I don't think that's optimal for my happiness or my effectiveness. In general, you're going to be happier and more effective if you're more optimistic than pessimistic, but you want to layer that optimism on top of a brutally realistic understanding of human nature. And you are not going to go broke. You are not going to fail in life by understanding human relationships in overwhelmingly transactional terms. That doesn't mean you want to clue everybody in to what you're thinking, because most people won't respond well to that brutal realism. But if you understand human relationships in largely transactional terms, even if you don't pronounce on them that way, you can then layer on top of that brutal realism, a sunny, optimistic attitude. But you shouldn't expect people to behave in ways substantially different from the transactional incentives. And this way, you're never going to be disappointed. So if you watch my streams, I don't think I'm somebody who is filled with resentment, disappointment, rage, betrayal. Oh my God, Joe let me down. Sarah let me down. I've been betrayed. Right? I'm a pretty happy, optimistic, sunny, fairly even-keeled to positive bloke, because I don't expect people to behave substantially different from their transactional incentives. And so I have almost no conscious resentment most of the time. And I'm not constantly feeling betrayed and let down, because I have this brutally realistic attitude. So good on Donald Trump for understanding relations in transactional terms. Now, I disagree with Donald Trump about the benefits of alliances. I wish that Donald Trump paid more attention to alliances, did more to build up our alliances. I think it's good for the United States to have alliances. I wish he treated our allies, and I wish he treated government workers with more respect. So, yeah, I wish he was nicer with our allies, our friends, our government employees. But I respect his skeptical view on human nature. And in general, the more religious a person, the more sober and skeptical their understanding of human nature. Right? Usually, the more religious the person, right, the less likely he is to be disillusioned, to be shocked and surprised by people's bad behavior. Right? You don't generally think of the most religious people as having a great deal of sunny illusions about human nature. Let's go to the chat. Radical love and inclusion is what they deal at Oxbridge now. Trump is optimistic about America, makes him look pessimistic to foreigners. So, one of the major differences in the narratives, the dominant narratives in the United States, England, and Australia. So those are probably the three nations that I know best, because I've lived in those three nations, and New Zealand, so those four. Right, I probably spent 9 months of my life in New Zealand. I spent about 18 months of my life in England. I spent about 14 years of my life in Australia, and then most of the rest in California, or the rest in the United States. So narratives and attitudes are much more optimistic in the United States compared to all the other nations of which I'm aware. There's a can-do, pragmatic thing that goes on in America that is vastly different from every other nation of which I'm aware. So narratives in Australia tend to be pessimistic, much more pessimistic than American. So there is an optimistic, enthusiastic, wear your heart on your sleeve, get excited, aim for the moon, entrepreneurial, strive for success ethos in the United States compared to every other nation of which I'm aware. But I just love that this Simon Kuper column in the Financial Times today saying that Donald Trump is the first pessimistic president. So here was a point that Kuper made, that compared to American narratives, Russian narratives are much more sober and pessimistic and negative. So think of Anna Karenina. And so Simon Kuper concludes his essay saying, maybe we'd better off if we read more Russian stories, because they're more realistic. I'm just endlessly amused by Europe's horror at Donald Trump and his plain speaking. That's another thing that used to define Americans. They were known for their bloody plain speaking. Now, our educated class, since the 1960s, uses that careful critical dialogue with a lot of euphemism, a lot of antiseptic language, kind of bureaucratic, technocratic language, politically correct language. But prior to the 60s, right, Americans were known for plain speaking. And Donald Trump, as opposed to Joe Biden and Barack Obama, all right, is the return of plain speaking. And some people will think plain speaking, that's too dark, it's too pessimistic, it's too transactional. Where's the inspiration and the spirituality there, mate? But I freaking love it. I can't wait for this hockey match tonight. I have not been this excited about a hockey match since 1980, when the United States took on the Soviet Union in the Winter Olympics. I remember that sense of excitement. And now at 6 p.m. tonight, we got the finals of the Four Nations. USA versus Canada match is taking place in Boston. Man, I hope it starts out with a fight. And I'm not normally someone who celebrates fighting during hockey matches, right? I haven't reached the spiritual heights of Dennis Prager, who's very opposed to fighting in hockey. But this should be fun. And it's good for Canada, good for America to get this excited about a hockey match, right? You should feel more alive. You have more opportunities to connect with your neighbors, right? Even if you are socially unskilled and you're not bringing a lot to the table, all right, you will find it easier to connect during this hockey match than the rest of your week. So good times await us. It just keeps getting better. You want to see Venice Beach video? Maybe. Talk to you later.